Sunlight, filtered through the sheer curtains, cast long shadows across the opulent living room of the Harris family home. The air, thick with unspoken tensions, hung heavy with the scent of lilies, a fragrance Rose had always found cloying. She stood rigidly, her hands clasped tightly before her, a small, defiant figure against the backdrop of the grand piano and antique furniture. "The 3-year period is almost over," she began, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor that ran through her. "2 days, just 2 more days and this charade will be over," she thought, the anticipation coiling in her stomach like a viper. "I'll come back on my own then. You guys go back. Don't get my identity exposed." Kevin shifted uneasily in his armchair, his gaze flitting between Rose and his mother. He picked at a loose thread on the cushion, a nervous habit Rose had come to despise. He hadn't looked her directly in the eye since she'd arrived. Coward, she thought, a bitter taste rising in her throat. 3 years. 3 years she had spent in this gilded cage, playing the role of the dutiful wife, enduring Madame Harris's constant criticisms and thinly veiled disdain. 3 years she had meticulously planned this moment, every word, every gesture a calculated move in her long game. Madame Harris, perched regally on the edge of the sofa, let out a dismissive snort. The jade bangles on her wrist clattered like tiny, disapproving whispers. "Exposed?" she echoed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What grand secret do you think you're hiding, dear? We all know you're nothing but—" The words hung in the air, unspoken but heavily implied. Rose could feel the familiar sting of humiliation, the same feeling that had gnawed at her for years. "Soon," she thought, her jaw tightening. "Soon, you'll know exactly who I am." Yolanda, sitting beside Madame Harris, placed a comforting hand on the older woman's arm. Her smile, as always, was impeccably sweet, her eyes radiating sympathy. "Auntie, please," she murmured, her voice soft as silk. "Rose is just upset. It's been a difficult time for everyone." Rose watched the interplay between them, the subtle gestures of shared understanding, the barely concealed triumph in Yolanda's eyes. The perfect daughter-in-law, she thought, a wave of nausea washing over her. Yolanda had been a constant presence in their lives, a shadow lurking in the periphery, always ready with a kind word for Kevin, a sympathetic ear for Madame Harris. Rose knew, with a chilling certainty, that Yolanda's concern was as fake as the diamonds glittering on her fingers. Kevin finally spoke, his voice hesitant, pleading. "Rose, please, don't do this. We can work things out." He reached out a hand towards her, but she recoiled as if he'd offered her a venomous snake. Work things out. The words echoed hollowly in her mind. How could they work things out when the foundation of their marriage had been built on a lie, on her forced compliance? She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man she'd once thought she loved, but a weak, spineless puppet dancing to his mother's tune. "There's nothing left to work out, Kevin," she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. The emptiness inside her was a vast, echoing cavern. "I'm leaving. And this time, I'm not coming back." Madame Harris rose to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful wretch. After everything we've done for you. You think you can just walk away?" Her voice rose to a shriek, the carefully constructed facade of composure shattering. Rose met her gaze, unflinching. "You have no idea what I've done," she thought, a flicker of something cold and hard igniting in her chest. "I'm not asking for anything from you," Rose said, her voice laced with a newfound steel. "I'm simply taking back what's mine." The emerald bracelet on Madame Harris's wrist, a family heirloom, caught the light. Rose's gaze lingered on it for a fraction of a second, a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening of her lips. "Mine," she thought, the word resonating with a dark satisfaction. The argument escalated, accusations flung like daggers across the room. "Kevin, caught in the crossfire, pleaded for reason, his voice drowned out by the rising tide of anger. Rose felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching the scene unfold from a distance. She had anticipated their reactions, planned for every contingency. Yet, there was a part of her, a small, flickering ember of the woman she once was, that felt a pang of sadness. "This is what you made me do," she thought, her gaze fixed on Madame Harris's furious face. Later, as dusk began to settle, casting long, distorted shadows across the room, a scream shattered the tense silence. It was Yolanda, her voice high-pitched and filled with terror. She pointed a trembling finger at Madame Harris, who lay slumped on the floor, the emerald bracelet missing from her wrist. Rose watched, her expression carefully neutral, as chaos erupted around her. Kevin rushed to his mother's side, his face a mask of disbelief and grief. Yolanda sobbed hysterically, clutching at Kevin's arm. In the ensuing pandemonium, Rose slipped away unnoticed, the missing bracelet tucked safely inside her purse. The viper in her stomach uncoiled, replaced by a chilling sense of triumph. She had won. She had taken back what was rightfully hers, and more. As she walked away from the Harris mansion, the city lights shimmering before her like a promise of a new beginning, a faint smile played on her lips. The 3 years of pretense were over. The game had just begun. The afternoon sun, a cruel intruder, sliced through the sheer curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the opulent Harris living room. It was a room designed to impress, to intimidate, and Rose felt the weight of it pressing down on her, suffocating her. Madame Harris, perched regally on the edge of a chaise lounge, her face a mask of barely contained fury, was the embodiment of that oppressive atmosphere. 3 years, Madame Harris spat, the words sharp as shards of glass. 3 years I've tolerated your presence in this house, your commonness. Rose's stomach twisted. Commonness. The word echoed the countless veiled insults, the subtle jabs that had chipped away at her self-worth over the years. She thinks I don't see through her, through this charade of propriety, Rose thought, her fingers curling into fists. She thinks her disdain is a secret. And for what? Madame Harris continued, her voice rising, a crescendo of bitterness. For what, Rose? Was it the Harris name? The money? The accusation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Kevin, standing by the fireplace, shifted uneasily, his gaze fixed on the swirling patterns in the marble. He looked, as always, like a bystander in his own life, caught in the crossfire of 2 warring factions. Rose felt a pang of something akin to pity, quickly followed by a surge of anger. He could stand up for me, she thought, her jaw tightening. He could say something, anything. But he remained silent, a statue carved from indecision. Had you not gone overseas? Madame Harris's voice cracked, a rare flicker of vulnerability crossing her face. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a steely resolve. How can this wretch get married into our family? The word struck Rose like a physical blow. Wretch. The venom in Madame Harris's voice was palpable, a poison seeping into the very air she breathed. Rose drew a shaky breath, her carefully constructed composure beginning to fracture. I didn't marry into your family, she retorted, her voice trembling slightly. I was there, by Kevin's side, when he was. She swallowed, the memory of those dark days, the sterile scent of the hospital room, the agonizing beep of the life support machine, flooding her senses. That when he was nothing but a shell of himself. When the doctors said there was no hope. Her words hung in the air, a stark contrast to Madame Harris's accusations. Kevin finally looked up, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Does he even remember? Rose wondered, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Does he remember the nights I spent by his bedside, praying for a miracle, willing him back to life? To pay the debt of gratitude, Madame Harris sneered, dismissing Rose's words with a wave of her hand, as if brushing away an annoying fly. "And this is what you people think of me?" Rose's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. "Debt of gratitude," she repeated, her voice rising, laced with a bitter irony that surprised even herself. "I sacrificed 3 years of my life, my career, my dreams, for your son. I nursed him back to health, I endured your constant criticism, your thinly veiled contempt." Her gaze locked with Madame Harris's, a silent battle of wills raging between them. "You think you're so clever," Madame Harris hissed, her eyes narrowed to slits. "But I see right through you, Rose. You're nothing but a gold digger, a social climber." Rose laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed in the opulent room. "Gold digger? If I were a gold digger, I would have left long ago, when Kevin was still," she trailed off, the word vegetable catching in her throat. The truth, raw and ugly, hung in the air. She hadn't left. She had stayed, not for the Harris fortune, but for a love she now realized had been a mirage. Yolanda, who had been a silent observer until now, stepped forward, her face a picture of gentle concern. "Madame Harris, please," she murmured, her voice soft and soothing. "Let's not get upset. It's not good for your health." Rose watched her, a flicker of suspicion igniting in her chest. Yolanda's concern felt performative, almost calculated. "She's enjoying this," Rose realized, a cold dread settling in her stomach. "She's reveling in my humiliation." Madame Harris, however, seemed to find comfort in Yolanda's presence. She leaned back against the cushions, her breathing becoming more regular. "You're right, Yolanda, dear," she said, her voice regaining some of its composure. "It's not worth getting upset over this ungrateful woman." Rose's mind raced. Something felt wrong, off-kilter. The diamond bracelet. Madame Harris's prized possession, the one she never took off. It was gone. Rose's gaze darted to Yolanda's wrist, where a flash of diamonds caught the light. "No," she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. "It can't be." But it was. Yolanda, the picture of innocence, wore the stolen bracelet. A wave of nausea washed over Rose as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Yolanda's feigned concern, Madame Harris's sudden calmness, the escalating argument, it had all been a setup. A carefully orchestrated performance. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. Yolanda hadn't just stolen a bracelet, she had stolen her life, her marriage, her future. And Madame Harris, she had been complicit all along. A strangled cry escaped Rose's lips, a mixture of rage, betrayal, and a chilling sense of understanding. The room seemed to spin, the opulent furnishings blurring into a kaleidoscope of colors. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her throat, as if to ward off the suffocating truth. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Madame Harris's eyes widened in shock, her hand clutching her chest. Rose stared in horror as the older woman slumped back against the cushions, her body going limp. Chaos erupted. Kevin rushed to his mother's side, his face contorted in grief. Yolanda screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. But amidst the pandemonium, Rose stood frozen, a strange calm settling over her. She watched the scene unfold as if from a distance, her mind detached, numb. The bracelet glinted on Yolanda's wrist, a stark reminder of the betrayal, the lies, and the deadly game that had just been played. "And I thought I was the one seeking revenge," Rose thought, a chilling smile playing on her lips. The afternoon sun, a cruel, indifferent eye, glared through the large bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the strained silence. Rose stood, her back ramrod straight, the echo of Madame Harris's shrill voice still ringing in her ears. 3 years. 3 years she'd spent in this gilded cage, a bird with clipped wings, and for what? The phantom promise of belonging, a family that never truly embraced her. A wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm her, not from the shouted accusations, but from the slow, insidious poison of disappointment that had seeped into her very bones. Madame Harris, her face contorted in a mask of fury, advanced on Rose. The older woman's hand, gnarled and spotted with age, lashed out, striking Rose's arm with surprising force. A gasp escaped Rose's lips, not from the pain, but from the sheer audacity of the act. This, then, was the final, brutal confirmation of everything she had suspected. There would be no reconciliation, no understanding. Only this raw, visceral display of hatred. "Pick it up!" Madame Harris shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. Rose's gaze followed the direction of the older woman's pointed finger. A diamond bracelet, glittering malevolently in the sunlight, lay on the polished wooden floor. It was Madame Harris's prized possession, a symbol of the wealth and status Rose could never hope to attain on her own. Had she knocked it off the table in the earlier argument? Rose couldn't recall. Her mind, a swirling vortex of emotions, struggled to grasp the details. All she knew was that this bracelet, this insignificant trinket, had become the focal point of yet another battle in a war she was already losing. Kevin, finally roused from his stupor, stumbled between the two women. His face, a canvas of conflicting emotions, reflected his usual indecisiveness. He reached for Rose's arm, his touch hesitant, almost apologetic. "Mother, please," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's just calm down." Rose recoiled from his touch. Calm down? How could he ask her to calm down when her world was crumbling around her? Didn't he see the years of subtle insults, the constant undermining, the veiled threats that had chipped away at her self-worth? He, the man who had vowed to protect her, stood there, a pathetic shadow of the man she thought she'd married. "Get out of our house." Madame Harris's voice, fueled by a righteous indignation that bordered on hysteria, sliced through the tense silence. The words, sharp and venomous, struck Rose like a physical blow. Our house. Not their house. The subtle possessive pronoun was a stark reminder of her outsider status. A bitter laugh threatened to escape Rose's lips. She had given so much, sacrificed so much, only to be discarded like a broken toy. "How can you treat my mom like this?" Kevin's voice, though louder now, still lacked conviction. He looked at Rose, his eyes pleading, but there was a flicker of something else in their depths. Accusation? Disappointment? Or perhaps, a glimmer of understanding? Rose couldn't decipher the complex emotions swirling within him. Through the window, a figure lurked in the shadows of the garden. A fleeting glimpse of a face, pale and watchful, sent a shiver down Rose's spine. Yolanda. She was always there, lurking on the periphery, a silent observer of their domestic drama. An unsettling thought crept into Rose's mind. Was Yolanda merely a bystander, or was she an active participant in this carefully orchestrated play? Had she planted the bracelet on the floor? The suspicion, once planted, took root, blossoming into a chilling certainty. Yolanda's feigned concern, her gentle touch, her whispered words of comfort, all of it a carefully constructed facade. Rose looked down at the bracelet, its facets catching the light, a miniature kaleidoscope of fractured promises. She bent slowly, picked it up, and held it out to Madame Harris. The older woman snatched it from her hand, her fingers digging into Rose's palm. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on Rose's lips. The game, she realized, was far from over. "I'm leaving," Rose said, her voice surprisingly steady. The words, though spoken softly, held a new kind of power. It was the power of acceptance, of finally letting go of the illusion of belonging. "But I won't leave empty-handed." The internal monologue raged within her. "They think they've won, but they haven't seen the real me yet. Kevin stared at her, his eyes wide with a dawning comprehension. He opened his mouth to speak, but Rose silenced him with a look. She turned and walked towards the door, her steps firm and resolute. The sunlight, no longer a cruel eye, but a beacon of hope, illuminated her path. As she reached the threshold, she paused, glancing back at the tableau of stunned faces. "This isn't over," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hammering of her heart. And as she stepped out into the blinding light, a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but a tear of liberation. The tear held the weight of years of suppressed anger, of calculated planning, and the cold, hard certainty of revenge. The game, indeed, was far from over. And Rose, finally free from the shackles of her gilded cage, was ready to play. The outsider in the garden, Yolanda, watched, a flicker of unease in her eyes. The bracelet was a small price to pay, she thought, for the prize she coveted. Kevin, now alone with his mother, stared at the empty doorway, a chilling premonition settling in his gut. He had underestimated his wife. He had misread her silence as weakness, her compliance as acceptance. Now, he realized with a growing sense of dread, he would pay the price for his ignorance. The house, once a symbol of his family's wealth and power, suddenly felt like a tomb. The events of the next few days unfolded with a dizzying rapidity. Madame Harris, distraught over the loss of her perceived control and consumed by a paranoia fueled by Rose's parting words, suffered a stroke. Kevin, caught in the crossfire of his mother's declining health and Rose's calculated maneuvers, found himself increasingly isolated and vulnerable. And Yolanda, ever the opportunist, seized the moment, offering comfort and support, weaving her web of deceit ever tighter around him. One evening, as Kevin sat by his mother's bedside, numb with grief and exhaustion, Yolanda appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "There's been an accident," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Rose, she's dead." Kevin felt a jolt, a sharp, agonizing pang of what? Regret? Relief? He couldn't tell. He looked at Yolanda, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and a chilling thought took root in his mind. He remembered the figure in the garden, the missing bracelet, Rose's cryptic warning. He had been a pawn in a game he hadn't even realized he was playing. And Rose, in her final, desperate act, had played her hand masterfully. The late afternoon sun cast long, melancholic shadows across the ornate living room of the Harris family home. Dust motes danced in the golden rays, illuminating the expensive, yet impersonal, furniture. Rose stood by the grand piano, its polished ebony surface reflecting her pale face. Her fingers traced the cool ivory keys, a nervous habit she hadn't realized she'd picked up during these 3 years of gilded cage living. Kevin paced between her and his mother, a deep furrow etched between his brows. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, his usual boyish charm replaced by a strained anxiety. "Maybe my visit caused some misunderstanding," he began, his voice tight with forced casualness. Rose's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Misunderstanding? Is that what he calls 3 years of systematic emotional abuse, of being treated like a servant in my own home?" The scent of lilies, Madame Harris's favorite, hung heavy in the air, suffocating Rose more effectively than any physical restraint. She could almost taste the cloying sweetness, a sickly reminder of the suffocating atmosphere she'd endured. Madame Harris, perched regally on the plush velvet sofa, scoffed, the diamonds on her fingers flashing like tiny, malevolent eyes. "Misunderstanding? Rose, you've always been overly sensitive. It's a simple matter of respecting your elders." Her voice, dripping with condescension, grated on Rose's nerves. "Respect? You've shown me nothing but contempt from the moment I stepped foot in this house." Rose's gaze hardened. She'd played the role of the dutiful wife for long enough. The mask of placid compliance was beginning to crack. Across the room, Yolanda sat composed, a picture of serene elegance. A faint smile played on her lips, a subtle yet unmistakable glint of triumph in her eyes. Rose felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, coursing through her veins. "This is what you wanted, isn't it, Yolanda? To watch me crumble, to swoop in and take my place." Kevin continued his futile attempts at mediation, oblivious to the currents of resentment swirling around him. "Look how thoughtful Yolanda is," he gestured towards the younger woman, who was now delicately arranging a vase of orchids. "I just like her so much." His words, meant to appease, landed like a blow to Rose's gut. The casual, almost childish way he expressed his admiration for Yolanda, in her presence, no less, felt like a final, devastating betrayal. "He doesn't even see it, does he? The way she manipulates him, the way she undermines me at every turn." Rose's carefully constructed composure began to unravel. A tremor ran through her, a visible manifestation of the turmoil raging within. "Rose, dear, why don't you sit down?" Yolanda's voice, smooth as silk, dripped with false concern. "You look pale. Perhaps a cup of tea?" The offer, so seemingly innocent, felt like a taunt. Rose knew, with a chilling certainty, that Yolanda was relishing her distress. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Pretending to be the concerned friend while you revel in my misery." Rose clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, a small, sharp pain grounding her in the swirling chaos of her emotions. "I don't need your tea, Yolanda," she said, her voice low and controlled, each word laced with ice. "And I won't be staying. I'm leaving, Kevin." Her declaration hung in the air, heavy with finality. Kevin's face paled. "Leaving? What are you talking about?" He looked from Rose to his mother, his expression bewildered, like a child caught between two warring giants. "Rose, please, don't be rash. We can work this out." His pleas sounded hollow, even to his own ears. He knew, deep down, that the fragile threads holding their marriage together had finally snapped. Madame Harris let out a theatrical sigh. "Oh, Rose, always so dramatic. You'll be back. Where else would you go?" Her words, meant to belittle, had the opposite effect. They ignited a fire in Rose's heart, a fierce determination to reclaim her life, to escape the suffocating grip of the Harris family. "Don't worry about where I'll go," Rose retorted, her voice steady now, infused with a newfound strength. "I'll manage just fine." As Rose turned to leave, her gaze swept across the room, landing on a small, antique jewelry box on the mantelpiece. A memory flashed through her mind, the diamond bracelet Kevin had given her for their anniversary, a token of a love she now realized had never truly existed. She remembered the way Madame Harris had sneered at the gift, deeming it too extravagant, too ostentatious. The bracelet had mysteriously disappeared a few days later. Rose had searched everywhere, convinced she'd misplaced it. Now, looking at the jewelry box, a chilling realization washed over her. She knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that the bracelet was inside. "You took it, didn't you?" she thought, her gaze fixed on Madame Harris. "You couldn't bear the thought of me having something beautiful, something you couldn't control." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs. A scream followed, sharp and piercing. Everyone froze. Kevin, his face ashen, raced towards the staircase. Rose hesitated, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She followed, her heart pounding against her ribs. They found Yolanda sprawled on the landing, her eyes wide and unseeing, a shattered vase beside her. Madame Harris stood at the top of the stairs, her hand clutched to her chest, her face contorted in a mask of shock and something else. Triumph? Relief? Rose couldn't decipher the complex emotions flickering across her mother-in-law's face. The police arrived, sirens wailing, their flashing lights painting the elegant Harris home in a harsh, unforgiving light. In the chaotic aftermath, amidst the whispers and accusations, Rose watched Kevin crumble under the weight of grief and confusion. He clung to his mother, seeking solace in her embrace, oblivious to the dark truth that was slowly beginning to unravel. Rose knew, deep in her heart, that Yolanda's death was no accident. And she suspected, with a growing certainty, that the truth was far more twisted and sinister than anyone could imagine. She slipped away unnoticed, the diamond bracelet, retrieved from the jewelry box amidst the chaos, cold against her wrist. The weight of it felt not like a victory, but a heavy, chilling reminder of the price of revenge. The opulent Harris family home, usually a stage for polite yet strained gatherings, crackled with a tension thick enough to choke on. Crystal chandeliers cast a cold light on the strained faces of Rose, Kevin, and Madame Harris. Yolanda, an unwelcome guest in Rose's eyes, sat poised on the edge of a plush armchair, a picture of serene concern. Rose's carefully constructed composure, maintained for the past hour, began to fray. He'll never understand. None of them will. The thought echoed in her mind, a bitter refrain to the accusations and justifications swirling around her. 3 years, Kevin. 3 years I've swallowed my pride, endured your mother's constant belittling, all for what? Her voice, though trembling slightly, carried an edge of steel. Kevin shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding her gaze. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic Rose had grown to despise. Rose, please, not this again. Mother just wants what's best for us. His words were hollow, even to his own ears. He could feel the familiar knot of guilt tightening in his stomach. He knew his mother's best often translated to her own twisted desires. Best for us? Or best for your family's image? Rose's laugh was sharp, devoid of humor. She fixed him with a piercing stare, her eyes glittering with unshed tears and a nascent fury he'd rarely witnessed. Weren't you jealous of Yolanda, Kevin? Her perfect pedigree, her unwavering obedience to your mother. She watched his face, searching for a flicker of recognition, a hint of the insecurity she knew festered beneath his placid exterior. He won't admit it, not even to himself. Kevin's face flushed. He stammered, "That's not fair, Rose. Yolanda is just a friend." He knew his words lacked conviction, but he clung to them like a lifeline. Admitting the truth, even to himself, would be to acknowledge his own weakness, his susceptibility to his mother's manipulations. Yolanda, with her demure smiles and carefully chosen words, represented everything his mother valued: obedience, social grace, and an unwavering focus on maintaining the Harris family standing. Rose, with her fiery spirit and independent nature, was a constant threat to that carefully constructed facade. Madame Harris, who had remained silent until now, let out a derisive snort. Jealous? Don't be ridiculous. You're the one who trapped Kevin into marriage with your charms. Her voice dripped with venom, each word a carefully aimed dart designed to pierce Rose's defenses. She thinks she can break me. She underestimates the lengths I will go to. Rose thought, a cold resolve hardening within her. The years of subtle insults, the constant reminders of her supposed inadequacy, had fueled a fire within her, a fire that now burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Charms. Rose repeated the word, letting it hang in the air like a poison drop. She met Madame Harris's gaze, her own eyes now blazing with a cold fire. Unlike Yolanda, I didn't need to resort to tricks. The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the room, a palpable shift in the power dynamic. Yolanda's carefully crafted mask of composure slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of fear in her eyes. Suddenly, Kevin gasped, clutching his chest. His face contorted in apparent pain. I am not feeling so well. Can you take me to the hospital? He looked at Rose, his eyes wide with a manufactured panic. Madame Harris rushed to his side, her concern a stark contrast to her earlier disdain. "Kevin. What is it?" "Rose, call an ambulance." Rose remained motionless, watching the scene unfold with a detached fascination. "He thinks this charade will work. He's underestimated me, just like his mother." A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that sent a chill down Yolanda's spine. "Of course, Kevin." Her voice was smooth, devoid of any genuine concern. "The game is afoot." She thought, her mind racing ahead, plotting the next move in her carefully orchestrated plan. The ambulance arrived, sirens wailing, adding to the already heightened drama. As Kevin was wheeled away, Madame Harris turned on Rose, her face a mask of fury. "This is your fault. You stressed him out with your ridiculous accusations." Rose met her gaze, her expression unreadable. "I assure you, Madame Harris, I had nothing to do with Kevin's sudden illness." Inside, however, a triumphant laugh echoed. Kevin's faked illness was the turning point, the moment she gained the upper hand. While they were at the hospital, she would execute the next phase of her plan. At the hospital, the chaos continued. Doctors rushed around, performing tests, while Madame Harris paced the waiting room, muttering about Rose's manipulative nature. Yolanda sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, a faint smile playing on her lips. "He'll be mine soon," she thought, relishing the anticipated victory. She had played her part perfectly, nurturing Kevin's insecurities, feeding Madame Harris's prejudices. Soon, she would be Mrs. Kevin Harris, inheriting the wealth and status she so desperately craved. Rose sat apart from them, her face pale, but her mind sharp and focused. While they were preoccupied with Kevin's performance, she had slipped away unnoticed, retrieving the item that would secure her future, Madame Harris's prized diamond bracelet, a family heirloom worth a fortune. "This is for everything, for all the pain and humiliation." She clutched the bracelet tightly in her hand, the cold weight of the diamonds a tangible symbol of her impending freedom. The doctor emerged, his expression grave. "I'm afraid Mr. Harris has suffered a severe allergic reaction. We're doing everything we can," but he trailed off, shaking his head. Madame Harris let out a wail of anguish. Yolanda rushed to her side, offering words of comfort, her eyes, however, fixed on the doctor, a flicker of something dark and calculating lurking beneath the surface of her concern. Rose remained silent, her face a mask of grief, but inside, a different kind of storm was raging. Kevin's allergic reaction wasn't part of the plan. Something had gone terribly wrong. A chill ran down her spine as a horrifying realization dawned upon her. The illness, the bracelet, Yolanda's too perfect composure, it all pointed to one chilling conclusion. She had been played. And Kevin, in his desperate bid for freedom from both his mother and Rose, had become a pawn in Yolanda's deadly game. She killed him. The thought echoed in Rose's mind, a chilling testament to the depths of betrayal and the devastating consequences of underestimated ambition. The hospital lights seemed to dim, the sterile scent of antiseptic overpowering, as the weight of the truth crushed down on her. She had sought revenge, but in the end, she had lost everything. The opulent Harris family home, once a symbol of aspiration, now felt like a gilded cage. Rose sat alone in the elaborately furnished living room, the silence amplifying the hollowness within her. The echoes of their earlier argument, a cacophony of accusations and recriminations, still reverberated in the air. Kevin, spineless as ever, had retreated to his study, leaving her to face the wreckage of their marriage. Her fingers tightened around the velvet cushion, its softness a stark contrast to the hard knot of resentment in her stomach. 3 years, she thought, the weight of the time pressing down on her like a physical burden. 3 years of pretending, of swallowing my pride, of allowing myself to be diminished. The click of heels against the marble floor announced Madame Harris's return. Rose straightened, a flicker of defiance igniting in her eyes. The older woman entered, her face a mask of displeasure, the lines around her mouth etched deep with disapproval. "Rose," she began, her voice laced with a condescending sweetness that grated on Rose's nerves. "Perhaps we can be reasonable about this." Rose's lips curved into a mirthless smile. "Reasonable? After the way you've treated me? After the constant insults, the subtle digs, the endless comparisons to Yolanda?" Madame Harris's composure wavered, a flash of anger crossing her features before she regained her composure. "You're being dramatic. This is simply a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Rose's voice rose, the tightly controlled composure she'd maintained beginning to fray. "Is it a misunderstanding that you've made it clear from day one that I wasn't good enough for your precious son? Is it a misunderstanding that you've constantly interfered in our lives, undermining my every decision?" "You're exaggerating," Madame Harris retorted, her eyes narrowing. "I only want what's best for Kevin." "What's best for Kevin," Rose repeated, the words dripping with sarcasm. "Or what's best for your family's image? What's best for maintaining your iron grip on the Wilson Group?" Madame Harris's hand trembled as she reached for a delicate porcelain teacup. The fragility of the cup seemed to mirror the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. "Rose," she said, her voice taking on a conciliatory tone. "Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. I'm prepared to offer you a generous settlement." Rose laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed through the room. "A settlement? You think you can buy me off?" She rose to her feet, her gaze meeting Madame Harris's with an unwavering intensity. "I don't need your money, Madame Harris." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air before delivering the blow. "I'm wealthier than you could ever imagine." The blood drained from Madame Harris's face, leaving her ashen. What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've spent the last 3 years playing a role," Rose said, her voice low and steady. "I've let you believe I was a naive, dependent little wife. But I'm not. I have my own resources, my own empire, built long before I ever met your son." A flicker of fear crossed Madame Harris's eyes. "You're lying." "Am I?" Rose reached into her purse and pulled out a document, tossing it onto the coffee table. "Take a look. It's a transfer agreement, showing the recent acquisition of a significant share in the Wilson Group. Enough, in fact, to give me considerable influence." Madame Harris snatched up the document, her hands shaking as she scanned the contents. Her face, already pale, turned a sickly shade of green. How is this possible?" she stammered. "It's possible," Rose said, a cold smile playing on her lips, "because I planned it that way. I'm telling you. No matter what, I'm Kevin's wife. I'm the future inheritor of Wilson Group." She paused, the weight of her next words settling heavily in the room. "I'm done, Kevin. I'm serious about it." The scene shifted abruptly. The sterile white walls of a hospital room replaced the opulent decor of the Harris mansion. Kevin lay in the bed, his face pale and drawn, and 4 drip attached to his arm. Yolanda sat beside him, her hand clasped around his, her face etched with concern. Madame Harris paced back and forth, her agitation palpable. "The doctors say it was a heart attack," Yolanda said, her voice trembling slightly. "Brought on by stress, they think." Madame Harris stopped pacing, her gaze fixed on Yolanda. "Stress?" Her voice was laced with suspicion. "What kind of stress?" Yolanda hesitated, her eyes darting nervously towards the unconscious Kevin. "Well, the divorce and then the news about Rose's wealth." Madame Harris's eyes narrowed, a flicker of understanding, then a chilling realization dawning in their depths. The stolen bracelet, a family heirloom of immense value, missing since the day of the confrontation. Rose's sudden declaration of wealth. The timing, it was too much of a coincidence. Later, alone in the dimly lit hospital corridor, Madame Harris pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed a number. It was her, she whispered, her voice raw with grief and rage. She did it. She poisoned him. On the other end, a smooth, almost amused voice replied, "As agreed, Madame Harris. Consider it a business transaction." Madame Harris hung up, a chilling sense of satisfaction washing over her, replacing the grief. She had lost a son, but she would gain an empire. And Rose, she thought with a grim smile, would pay the price. The plush leather of the Bentley's seat molded itself to Rose's back, a stark contrast to the stiff, unforgiving chairs of the Harris dining room. Sunlight glinted off the polished mahogany dashboard, reflecting in the emerald facets of the diamond bracelet clasped around her wrist. It was a hefty weight, both physically and metaphorically, a symbol of the life she was meticulously crafting for herself. A life far removed from the suffocating charity she'd endured for the past 3 years. 3 years of Madame Harris's thinly veiled contempt, 3 years of Kevin's passive acquiescence, 3 years of swallowing her pride and burying her dreams. A bitter smile touched her lips. They thought they knew her, thought they could dismiss her as a naive, grateful orphan. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The chauffeur pulled up to the curb outside the glittering facade of DeVille's. Rose stepped out, the cool air a welcome caress against her skin. She ran a hand over the smooth fabric of her dress, a simple yet elegant design that spoke volumes without shouting. Inside, the air hummed with the low murmur of conversations and the clinking of champagne flutes. Rose moved through the space with a newfound confidence, her gaze sweeping over the displays of glittering jewels and designer gowns. She no longer felt like an imposter in this world of luxury. She was claiming her place. Look at that. The woman loves a good show-off. Madame Harris's voice, sharp as shattered glass, sliced through the air. Rose turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral. Beside Madame Harris stood Yolanda, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and something akin to envy. Rose registered the flicker of satisfaction that crossed Madame Harris's face. This was precisely the reaction she'd anticipated. How else do you think a penniless orphan like her can afford to go shopping here? Rose allowed a small, almost imperceptible sigh to escape her lips. Madame Harris, Yolanda, she acknowledged, her voice calm and even. Inside, a storm of conflicting emotions raged. Anger, resentment, and a cold, hard satisfaction warred for dominance. She had spent years mastering the art of concealing her true feelings, and now, that mask served her well. Yolanda's gaze flickered to the bracelet on Rose's wrist, her eyes widening slightly. Rose followed her gaze, a faint smile playing on her lips. It was Kevin's grandmother's heirloom, a piece Madame Harris held dear. Or had held dear, until it mysteriously vanished a few weeks ago. The same week Rose had quietly opened a new bank account, far from the prying eyes of the Harris family. "Rose, dear, isn't that grandmother's bracelet?" Yolanda asked, her voice a carefully modulated blend of concern and accusation. Rose met her gaze, her expression unreadable. She tilted her wrist, letting the diamonds catch the light. "It is rather lovely, isn't it?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Madame Harris's face hardened. "Where did you get that?" she demanded, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. The carefully constructed facade of social grace began to crumble. The raw greed and disdain she usually reserved for private moments now seeped into her public persona. Rose's smile widened, just a fraction. "Does it matter?" she asked, her voice laced with a newfound steel. The years of suppressed anger, the constant reminders of her supposed indebtedness, the endless stream of subtle insults, they all fueled her now, hardening her resolve. Madame Harris took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "You little thief! You stole it!" Rose laughed, a low, throaty sound that startled both women. "Stole it?" she repeated, tilting her head. "Is that what you think?" She paused, letting the question hang in the air. She knew exactly what they thought. They saw her as they always had, a desperate, opportunistic climber. And that, she realized, was her greatest advantage. They underestimated her. They saw only what they wanted to see. "Let's not make a scene, shall we?" Rose continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement." Madame Harris narrowed her eyes, suspicion battling with avarice. "What kind of arrangement?" she asked, her voice cautious. Rose leaned closer, her voice barely audible above the ambient noise. "I want a divorce," she stated, her gaze unwavering. "And I want a generous settlement." A flicker of understanding, then a surge of fury, crossed Madame Harris's face. "You're divorcing Kevin? For money?" "Let's just say I'm finally taking what I deserve," Rose replied, her voice smooth as silk. 3 years of my life is worth something, wouldn't you agree? The confrontation escalated, voices rising, accusations flying. Rose remained calm, her gaze fixed on Madame Harris, unflinching. She had anticipated this, planned for it. She knew their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. She knew how to exploit them. Later, at the Harris residence, the argument continued, escalating to a fever pitch. Kevin, caught in the crossfire, looked from his mother to his wife, his face a mask of confusion and distress. He had always seen Rose as fragile, vulnerable. He hadn't seen the steel beneath the surface, the carefully cultivated strength. He hadn't seen the storm brewing within her. As the night wore on, secrets were revealed, betrayals exposed. The carefully constructed facade of the Harris family began to crumble, revealing the rot beneath. The stolen bracelet became a symbol of the deeper deception, the hidden motives, the corrosive power of greed. And in the midst of the chaos, one thing became clear: Rose was no longer the victim. She was the architect of her own destiny, a destiny forged in the fires of resentment and fueled by a thirst for retribution. The night ended not with tears and reconciliation, but with the chilling realization that some wounds cut too deep to heal. The final twist, a shocking revelation of Yolanda's own machinations, left Kevin reeling, his world shattered. He had been a pawn in a game he hadn't even realized he was playing. And the price of his ignorance was devastating. The air in the Harris mansion crackled with a tension so thick, it felt as if it could be sliced with a knife. Rose stood, her back ramrod straight, her gaze locked on Madame Harris, who sat perched on the edge of a plush velvet sofa, a picture of manufactured composure. Rose's knuckles were white against the stiff leather of her handbag, her grip so tight she could feel the seams digging into her palm. 3 years, she thought, the words echoing in the hollow spaces of her heart. 3 years wasted in this gilded cage. Yolanda hovered nearby, a picture of gentle concern etched on her face, but Rose saw the flicker of triumph in her eyes. It was a look that ignited a cold fire in Rose's gut. "This shameless woman," Madame Harris began, her voice laced with venom, "is trying to seduce Kevin. Trying to tear our family apart." Rose fought the urge to laugh. Seduce Kevin? As if she hadn't spent the last 3 years trying to build a bridge to a man whose heart seemed permanently locked away, guarded by his mother's iron will. "The only thing being torn apart," Rose replied, her voice steady, "is the web of lies you've woven, Madame Harris." She took a slow, deliberate step forward, each click of her heels against the marble floor a drumbeat of accusation. "Where is it?" Madame Harris's carefully constructed mask began to crack. Confusion flickered in her eyes, quickly replaced by a flash of panic. "Where is what?" she asked, her voice a shade too high. "Don't play coy," Yolanda chimed in, her voice soft yet edged with steel. "We're talking about the Croatian star, Madame Harris." Rose almost admired Yolanda's performance, the way she managed to appear both supportive and accusatory. A true wolf in sheep's clothing. The color drained from Madame Harris's face. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching at the empty space where the diamond bracelet, the infamous Croatian star, usually resided. I don't know what you're talking about." The words were weak, unconvincing. Rose could practically taste the fear radiating from the older woman. "Caught red-handed." Rose's voice was sharp, triumphant. She could see the wheels turning in Kevin's head, the confusion warring with dawning realization. He looked from his mother, pale and trembling, to Rose, her eyes blazing with a cold fire he'd never seen before. Madame Harris gasped, clutching her chest. Her eyes rolled back, and she crumpled to the floor. Chaos erupted. Kevin rushed to his mother's side, his face a mask of panic. Yolanda knelt beside him, murmuring soothing words, her hand resting on his arm, a picture of wifely concern. Rose watched the scene unfold, a strange detachment settling over her. It was as if she were watching a play, a drama she'd orchestrated herself. The ambulance arrived, sirens wailing, flashing lights cutting through the opulent gloom of the Harris mansion. As they wheeled Madame Harris away, Kevin turned to Rose, his eyes filled with a mixture of accusation and bewilderment. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Rose merely met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She had planted the seed of doubt, and now she would watch it grow. The hospital was a sterile, antiseptic world, a stark contrast to the suffocating luxury of the Harris mansion. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow on the pale walls. Madame Harris lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines, her breaths shallow and ragged. The doctor spoke in hushed tones to Kevin and Yolanda, explaining the complexities of Madame Harris's condition, the stress-induced heart attack, the precariousness of her situation. Rose stood apart, observing the scene with a detached curiosity. She felt a flicker of something akin to pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold embers of her long-simmering resentment. The days that followed blurred into a surreal montage of hushed conversations, anxious waiting, and the constant, oppressive scent of disinfectant. Madame Harris remained in a critical condition, teetering on the edge of consciousness. Kevin was a shadow of his former self, haunted by guilt and worry. Yolanda was ever present, a constant source of comfort and support. Rose watched them, her mind working, calculating her next move. Finally, the inevitable happened. Madame Harris passed away, her heart finally succumbing to the weight of her own secrets. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by the city's elite, all dressed in black, whispering condolences and veiled judgments. Rose stood at the back, observing the spectacle, a ghost in her own life. The reading of the will was the final act in this twisted drama. The lawyer, a stern-faced man with a voice like dry leaves, droned on about trusts and bequests, his words washing over Rose like a cold wave. Then, he came to the part about the Croatian star, the bracelet that had started it all. It had been recovered, found tucked away in a secret compartment in Madame Harris's safe. The lawyer explained that Madame Harris, in a fit of paranoia and desperation, had stolen the bracelet, convinced that Rose was after the family's fortune. Kevin turned to Rose, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and remorse. I didn't know," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Rose simply nodded, her expression unreadable. The lawyer continued, revealing the final twist in this intricate game of deception. Madame Harris, in a last act of spite, had rewritten her will, leaving the bulk of her estate to Yolanda. Rose felt a cold satisfaction spread through her veins. It was a victory, of sorts, though not the one she had initially envisioned. She had exposed Madame Harris's true nature, revealed Yolanda's manipulative schemes, and in the process, freed herself from the gilded cage of her marriage. "Mr. Harris," Rose said, her voice clear and steady, "the divorce papers are on your table." She handed him a sealed envelope, the finality of the gesture echoing in the silent room. Kevin took the envelope, his hand trembling slightly. He looked at Rose, his eyes searching hers, as if seeking an explanation, an apology, anything to make sense of the wreckage of their lives. But Rose offered nothing. She turned and walked away, leaving Kevin standing amidst the ruins of his family, his inheritance, his life. As she stepped out of the Harris mansion and into the crisp morning air, Rose took a deep breath, the scent of freedom filling her lungs. The past 3 years had been a painful lesson, a trial by fire. But she had emerged from the ashes, stronger, wiser, and finally, free. She had lost a husband, but she had gained something far more valuable, herself. And as she walked away, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she would never be caged again. The opulent Wilson family home stood in stark contrast to the modest dwelling Rose had shared with Kevin. Sunlight glinted off the vast expanse of manicured lawns, and the towering marble columns seemed to mock the cramped apartment she'd just left. As she stepped from the car, the scent of jasmine and roses, a stark contrast to the stale cigarette smoke that perpetually clung to Kevin's clothes, filled her lungs. A strange sense of calm descended upon her, a deceptive tranquility masking the storm brewing within. Inside, the air crackled with tension. Kevin sat slumped on a plush velvet sofa, his face a mask of bewildered misery. Madame Harris, her usual imperious demeanor slightly fractured, paced like a caged tiger. Yolanda, radiating an aura of practiced concern, stood beside Kevin, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Rose observed them, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. 3 years. 3 years of playing the meek, submissive wife. 3 years of enduring Madame Harris's constant criticisms and Yolanda's subtle jabs. It had been a performance worthy of an Oscar. "Rose," Kevin began, his voice strained, "what's all this about? This this madness?" Rose met his gaze, her own expression carefully neutral. "Madness, Kevin? Or perhaps clarity?" Madame Harris snorted, her face twisting in disgust. "Clarity? You've been blinded by greed, girl. You think you can just walk away with half of Kevin's inheritance." "Inheritance?" Rose's voice, soft yet edged with steel, echoed through the grand hall. "A rather optimistic term, wouldn't you say, considering your son's financial acumen?" Yolanda's hand tightened on Kevin's arm. A flicker of something dark, something predatory, flashed in her eyes. Rose caught it, and a chill snaked down her spine. This woman, she realized, was more dangerous than she'd initially thought. A deep voice boomed from the top of the grand staircase. "What's the meaning of this commotion?" A hush fell over the room as a distinguished-looking man, his face etched with authority, descended the stairs. Sir Wilson, Rose's grandfather, her true family. The Harrisas knew her as Rose Smith, a seemingly ordinary woman. They had no inkling of her true lineage. "Grandfather," Rose said, her voice softening slightly, a hint of vulnerability carefully crafted for her audience. Sir Wilson's eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept over the room, taking in the scene. He stopped at Rose, his gaze lingering for a moment before settling on the Harrisas. Why should the Wilson family's gems suffer over at the Harris family? His voice, low and dangerous, vibrated with barely suppressed rage. "My cherished granddaughter," he paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "I'll make them pay." The Harrisas, faces pale and drawn, stared at Rose in stunned silence. The realization of who she truly was, the magnitude of their mistake, slowly dawned on them. Kevin's jaw slackened, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked from Rose to his mother, then back to Rose again, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even regret, in his eyes. Rose allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The game was finally afoot. 3 years. 3 years of pretending, of enduring their scorn, their manipulation. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was about the debt. A debt she had now collected in full. The divorce was just the beginning. In the following days, the news of Rose's affair spread like wildfire. It was a carefully orchestrated leak, designed to further isolate Kevin and discredit the Harris family. Rose, however, had little time for idle gossip. She was busy, meeting with lawyers, strategists, and him. Their first meeting took place in a quiet, secluded cafe. Henry Adams. Her new bodyguard, recommended by her grandfather. Tall, imposing, with eyes that seemed to see right through her, he exuded an air of quiet competence and danger. "Ms. Wilson," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Rose," she corrected, her gaze holding his. He nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Rose. In that single, shared word, something shifted. A spark ignited, a connection forged in the crucible of their shared purpose. He saw beyond the facade, beyond the carefully constructed mask she presented to the world. He saw the real Rose, the woman beneath the armor. And in his eyes, she saw a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Perhaps, amidst the chaos and revenge, there was a chance for something more. A chance for a future she hadn't dared to imagine. The Harris family's downfall was swift and brutal. Sir Wilson, a man of immense power and influence, unleashed his wrath with calculated precision. Their business ventures crumbled, their reputation tarnished, their social standing reduced to ashes. Madame Harris, stripped of her wealth and prestige, became a shadow of her former self, her bitterness a constant companion. Yolanda, her dreams of marrying into wealth shattered, disappeared, swallowed by the shadows from which she had emerged. Kevin, however, remained. Broken, disillusioned, he approached Rose one final time. They met in the same park where they had first encountered each other, a lifetime ago. The air was crisp, the leaves turning shades of gold and crimson. He looked older, wearier, the boyish charm replaced by a quiet resignation. "I understand now," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I understand why you did it." Rose nodded, her heart aching with a strange mixture of sadness and triumph. "It wasn't just about revenge, Kevin. It was about finding myself again." He looked at her, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, the words heavy with unspoken regret. "I'm sorry for everything." Rose offered him a small, sad smile. "Goodbye, Kevin." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone amidst the falling leaves, a ghost of the man he once was. The past was finally behind her. The debt was paid. And as she stepped into the uncertain future, a single thought echoed in her mind: this was just the beginning. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing within Rose. She stood by the window, the city lights blurring into an indifferent panorama. "He's stable now," the doctor had said, "but his emotional state is fragile." Fragile. The word echoed the brittle threads of her own composure. Kevin. She watched his chest rise and fall rhythmically beneath the thin hospital blanket, a pang of something not quite remorse, not quite pity tightening in her chest. It was a strange, dissonant note in the symphony of her carefully orchestrated plan. 3 years. 3 years she had played the dutiful wife, endured Madame Harris's constant barbs, swallowed her own pride. 3 years for this. Her phone buzzed, a news alert flashing across the screen. Breaking news. Wife of multimillionaire Kevin Harris. Rose's lips curved into a cold smile. The first domino had fallen. The meticulously crafted articles, leaked anonymously, painted a vivid picture of Kevin's supposed infidelities, his gambling debts, his questionable business dealings. Each word a carefully aimed dart, designed to pierce the carefully constructed facade of the Harris family. You wanted a scandal, Madam Harris? I'll give you one you'll never forget. Across town, the pristine walls of the Harris mansion seemed to vibrate with a sudden, palpable tension. Madam Harris's face, usually composed and imperious, was now a mask of disbelief, her eyes wide with horror as she stared at the television screen. This is impossible, she choked out, her hand clutching her chest. Her world, a world built on appearances and carefully guarded secrets, was crumbling before her eyes. The meticulously crafted image of her son, her family, shattered into a million pieces. The news report continued, each word a fresh blow. Even publicizing her affair, the camera zoomed in on a grainy photo of Rose, her hand intertwined with another man's. A man Madam Harris vaguely recognized as one of Kevin's business associates, Henry. The irony was a bitter pill. With CEO Henry Chen, known associate of Kevin Harris, the phone slipped from Madam Harris's grasp, clattering onto the marble floor. The room began to spin, the opulent furniture blurring into distorted shapes. A sharp pain shot through her chest, radiating down her left arm. Kevin, she whispered, her voice barely audible, before collapsing onto the plush carpet. Back at the hospital, Rose received the news with a flicker of satisfaction. Madam Harris's collapse was an unexpected bonus, a satisfying twist of fate. You thought you could control everything, didn't you? She thought, her gaze still fixed on Kevin's unconscious form. You thought you could break me. She touched her stomach, a subtle, almost unconscious gesture. A secret she held close, a weapon yet to be deployed. The confrontation with Madam Harris, when it came, was less explosive than Rose had anticipated. The older woman, pale and weak, lay propped up against pillows, her eyes burning with a cold fury. You ruined my plan again, she rasped, her voice laced with venom. You should end up in jail. Rose met her gaze unflinchingly. Your plan? She echoed, a hint of amusement in her voice. To control Kevin's life, to dictate his every move. To treat me like a piece of furniture you could discard at will. You're nothing but a gold digger. Madam Harris spat. You trapped Kevin with your lies, her voice trailed off, her breath catching in her throat. My what, Madam Harris? Rose leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. My pregnancy. The word hung in the air, a bombshell detonating in the sterile silence of the hospital room. Madam Harris stared at her, speechless, her face contorted in a mixture of shock and disbelief. Rose allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to play on her lips. This, she knew, would change everything. Later, the confrontation with Yolanda was even more satisfying. Yolanda, the picture of composed concern, hovering by Kevin's bedside, her hand resting lightly on his arm. The perfect picture of the devoted friend, the future wife. Rose's arrival shattered the illusion. Yolanda, she said, her voice dripping with ice. So nice of you to visit. Yolanda's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of unease in her eyes. Rose, she replied, her voice strained. I was just concerned. Concerned? Rose laughed, a short, sharp sound. Or are you celebrating? Your plan worked, didn't it? Kevin is free now. Free to marry you. Yolanda's face paled. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her. Don't you? Rose countered, her gaze unwavering. You and Madam Harris, you've been plotting this for months, haven't you? The arrival of Kevin, pale and disoriented, added another layer of complexity to the already charged atmosphere. He looked from Rose to Yolanda, his eyes filled with confusion. "What's going on?" he asked weakly. "Rose, what are you talking about?" Before Rose could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. "Maybe I can explain," Henry said, stepping into the room. His presence was a physical shock, a tangible reminder of the carefully constructed web of lies and betrayals. He held a small, velvet box in his hand. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, lay a diamond bracelet, the bracelet Rose had accused Madame Harris of stealing years ago. The very same one that triggered this chain reaction. The room fell silent. Every eye was fixed on him, waiting. The news of Rose's affair with Henry, her pregnancy and subsequent miscarriage, hit the media like a tidal wave. The carefully crafted narrative of the wronged wife crumbled, replaced by a new, more scandalous story. The public, always eager for a twist, devoured the details. Kevin, still reeling from the revelation of his mother's machinations and Yolanda's betrayal, now faced another devastating blow. He looked at Rose, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and bewilderment. "Why?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Rose met his gaze, her expression unreadable. The fleeting pang of something she had felt earlier, that flicker of almost remorse, was gone, replaced by a cold emptiness. The game was over, and she had won. But at what cost? The question echoed in the silence, unanswered, unheard. The sterile scent of the hospital seemed to intensify, suffocating, a grim reminder of the wreckage left behind. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the metallic tang of blood that Rose could still taste on her lips. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Madame Harris's face, contorted in a mask of disbelief, was etched into her mind. A single, decisive act. A lifetime of resentment culminating in a moment of terrible finality. Across the hall, Kevin lay in a hospital bed, pale and unconscious. Yolanda, her supposed friend, her confidant, stood by his side, a picture of solicitous concern. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. Rose watched her, a coldness settling in her heart. This woman, with her gentle smiles and soft words, had orchestrated this entire charade. Had pushed Kevin to the brink, fueled Madame Harris's paranoia, and all for what? To secure her place in this gilded cage, this family built on lies and deceit. Rose had initially approached this confrontation with the intention of simply ending her marriage. 3 years. 3 years of subtle jabs, of being treated as an outsider, an interloper in Madame Harris's carefully constructed world. 3 years of watching Kevin, the man she loved, wither under his mother's thumb. She had planned to walk away, to salvage what remained of her dignity. But then the truth had unraveled, a tangled skein of betrayal and manipulation. The missing bracelet, a seemingly insignificant trinket, had become the catalyst. Madame Harris, convinced Rose had stolen it, had launched into a tirade, her voice shrill with accusations. The words had stung, not because they were true, but because they echoed every unspoken slight Rose had endured. In that moment, something within her snapped. "You've taken everything from me." Rose had cried, the words raw with pain. "My life, my happiness, even," her voice cracked, the memory of her lost child afresh wound, "even my child." Madame Harris's eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing her face. "Your child?" "Yes," Rose hissed, the venom she had suppressed for so long finally spilling out. "The child you convinced Kevin to force me to get rid of. The child that was his." The revelation hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Kevin, roused by the commotion, had stumbled into the room, his eyes clouded with confusion. What are you talking about?" "You're the father, Kevin," Rose said, her voice strangely calm amidst the storm raging within her. "The father of the child she made you believe was someone else's." Kevin's face crumpled. He looked from Rose to his mother, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Mother, is this true?" Madame Harris opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Her face, usually so composed, was a mask of shock. Then, her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed. The heart monitor beside Kevin's bed emitted a piercing shriek. Chaos erupted. Nurses rushed in, their faces etched with urgency. Rose stood frozen, watching as they attempted to revive Madame Harris. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Relief, regret, a strange sense of detachment. She hadn't meant for this to happen. Had she? Then, Yolanda's voice, sharp and accusing, cut through the din. "You killed her. You pushed her." Rose turned to face her, a cold smile playing on her lips. "Did I?" she asked, her voice laced with ice. "Or did she die from the weight of her own lies?" Before Yolanda could respond, a figure emerged from the shadows. Henry, her lawyer, her confidant, the one person who knew the full extent of her plan. He placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's time to go, Rose." As they slipped away from the scene of the unfolding tragedy, Rose's mind raced. This wasn't how she'd envisioned it. But amidst the chaos, a new clarity had emerged. Madame Harris was gone, and Kevin was well. He was a broken man. But he was alive. And he was finally free from his mother's suffocating grip. Later, in the quiet solitude of Henry's office, Rose recounted the events of the night. Kevin's whispered confession, his tearful apologies, the realization that he had been a pawn in his mother's cruel game. "Rose," he had said, his voice choked with emotion, "I will always support you and protect you." Henry listened intently, his expression unreadable. "Yolanda," he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "She's the key to all of this. Her ambition, her desperation, it's going to be her undoing." Rose nodded, a glimmer of steel in her eyes. Yolanda had played her games, manipulated Kevin, and driven Madame Harris to her death. Now, it was time for her to pay the price. Rose looked out the window, the city lights blurring in her tear-filled eyes. The cycle of revenge, it seemed, was far from over. She had lost so much, endured so much pain. But now, she had a new purpose. To protect Kevin, to expose Yolanda, to reclaim her life from the ashes of the past. The path ahead would be long and arduous, but Rose was ready. She had faced the darkness, and she had emerged stronger, more determined than ever before. The memory of Madame Harris's lifeless eyes still haunted her, a constant reminder of the price of betrayal. But it was also a catalyst, a driving force that propelled her forward. She would not rest until justice was served, until the truth was revealed, and until she had finally found peace. The game had changed, and Rose was ready to play.